Good Erev Shabbos, Bayit family. Looking forward to this Shabbat, Youth Shabbat at the Bayit, in which we celebrate our awesome Bayit children, our amazing teen leaders, and all they do to make Shabbat and Yom Tov mornings a special place for kids to be in the Bayit, and in particular the teens who've gone above and beyond over these last 8 months to support the families of our Chayalim who've returned after October 7th to protect Medinat Yisrael. We're so grateful to them. And this Shabbat, just a day after an incredible Chag Shavuot, with Rabbi Yafa Epstein and Shimi Feintuch learning the Torah of healing and the healing of Torah, this Shabbat we read Parashat Nasso. We pretty much always read Parashat Nasso after Shavuot. Why? Well, the Gemara gives a variation on this answer. It tells us why it is that we need to read Parashat Bamidbar, last week's parasha, right before Shavuot. And it explains that we read the Tochachot, the Klalot, the two different portions, one in Parashat Bechukotai and one in Parashat Kitavo. We read those portions just before New Year's in order to fulfill the dictum Tichle Shana V'Kilaloteha, that a year ends with the terrible things, the curses that were a part of it. And if we have to endure or experience terrible things or read in the Torah sections about terrible things that will befall Bnei Yisrael, we want to do that at the bottom of the year so that we can start a new year fresh. And so we read Parashat Kitavo shortly before Rosh Hashanah. And then the Gemara says, but what about Parashat Bechukotai, the curses in Bechukotai, the Tochacha? What new year is that before? And it answers, it's before Atzeret, it's before Shavuot, the season on which the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah tells us that we are judged, or it is a new year for Perot HaIlan. We learn that we are actually judged on the produce and the yield that fruit trees will bear in the coming year on Shavuot. It's Chag HaBikurim, it's the time of first fruits, and it's the time in which, however we imagine this in the heavenly realm, the coming year's produce yield for fruit trees will be determined. So in a sense, Shavuot functions like a new year. And so if we have to read about terrible things befalling the Jewish people, as we do in Parashat Bechukotai, we read it, then we have 1 week's buffer in Parashat Bamidbar, and then we come to Shavuot, a kind of a new year, a new beginning. That explains why we read Bamidbar right before Shavuot. But then what is the meaning of reading Nasso right after Shavuot? The Gemara doesn't address this question. It's just the parsha that comes after Bamidbar, the one we're supposed to read right before Shavuot. But the Mea Shiloach, in this week's parasha, in his first comment, the Ishbitzer Rebbe's first comment on Parashat Nasso, I think subtly implies an answer. He points out that in this week's parasha, Parashat Nasso, when we read of the princely gifts for the inauguration of the Mishkan and its completion, Vayhi biyom kalot Moshe lahakim et HaMishkan, on the day that Moshe concluded establishing, erecting, and setting up the Mishkan. That's the subject of the latter part of this week's parasha. He says, the Ishbitzer Rebbe says, this is the end of 17 parashiot that essentially encode and encompass the instructions for, the contents of, and the carrying out of the construction and functioning of the Mishkan. Starting all the way back in Parashat Terumah, it's been 17 parashiot. Basically, a full third of the Torah has been spent with God telling Bnei Yisrael and Moshe communicating to Bnei Yisrael and Bnei Yisrael carrying out the collection of supplies for the building of the Mishkan and the laws of what is to take place in the Mishkan and ultimately the Beit HaMikdash. The Ishbitzer says Tov, the gematria of 17, the 17 parashiot is Tov, and that what goodness is about durability. It's about permanence. And it takes these 17 weeks till we reach a stage of permanence. Permanence of what, says the Ishbitzer Rebbe? Permanence of Torah and God's presence in our midst. The Mishkan, of course, is the place in which God brings God's presence to dwell permanently with Bnei Yisrael. And the heart of the Mishkan is the Aron, and the heart of the Aron is the place where the Luchot, the vehicle for God's presence amongst us through the Torah, comes to rest and dwell in the Mishkan. And the Ishbitzer goes on to say, when Bnei Israel went out of Egypt and they all saw God at the sea, They were still in the mindset of slaves. God's presence amongst them was not permanent. Even when they got the Torah at Har Sinai, the Torah became embedded, engraved in their hearts, but not in a way that was actually durable and fixed. Only when the Mishkan was inaugurated and completed in Parashat Nasso does the presence of God become fixed and permanent in the hearts and lives and community of Am Yisrael. And so this week's parasha converges with the moment we are at in the calendar year. This week's parasha is the inauguration of the Mishkan, and this Shabbat is really about the enshrining of Torah in the calendar year, when we complete on Shavuot the giving of the Torah and then say, where are we moving to next? We're moving to the construction of the Mishkan and the contents of the Mishkan. And this Shabbat really, Parashat Nasso, is about the convergence of the journey of the permanence of God and Torah in the heart of Bnei Yisrael through Parshiot Shavua and also through the calendar year. That now, having completed Shavuot, we're ready for the next part of the journey, which is the construction of the Mishkan, the permanent place for the dwelling of God, the dwelling of Torah in the hearts and in the geographic center of our people. And so let this Shabbat, especially appropriate to be a youth Shabbat when we think about our children as the ones who teach us profoundly about Torah and about God's presence in our people, the ones who are our present and our future, that we celebrate with them. And we challenge ourselves to truly make God's Torah and God's presence fixed, durable, and permanent in our hearts. May it be a source of strength for us, for Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, for all those in need of strength and relief in these days. May we get to do it together. Shabbat Shalom with love.